And we welcome you back to the show. Well, the Alliance for Quality Education is New York State's leading community-based organization in the fight for adequate funding as well as educational justice. It's working to end the systemic racism and economic oppression in New York's public schools, which constitutes shortchanging generations of Black, Brown, and low income, as well as immigrant students. Joining us to share a little bit more of details on this, I am joined by the New York City campaign coordinator at Alliance for Quality Education, Asamia Diaby. And thank you, Asamia, for being with us.
Thank you. And just for any correction, I'm the New York City organizer. The campaign coordinator is my homie, Smitha, but she's not here today.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry about that, but I'm glad to have you as an organizer. And as an organizer, that means you have boots on the ground, putting the work in, and so much to talk about when it comes to the area of education as well as communities of color. Share a little bit about the work that your organization does.
Yes, the Alliance for Quality Education is in its 21st year of existence. From the beginning of our story doing this work, we've been really connected to the issue of underfunding and under-resourcing New York City and New York State public schools. And so our history began with a parent leader in Washington Heights, Robert Jackson, suing New York State because he understood that like his children were going to schools in the Heights and uptown. And when you go outside of these neighborhoods, the schools are well-resourced, well-funded, and the students are actually getting what they deserve. And so HQE was created to kind of support that work and hopefully bring a resolution to that case. And so we thought it would have been a really short fight, but we've been fighting to get full funding for New York State public schools since we began in 2000. And so it's been a long fight, but the long story short version is it's 2021. We are finally getting the billions of dollars that was won when the lawsuit was settled and when the courts realized that New York State was in fact not providing students with the basic education they deserve. And so basically, HUE organizes with parents across the state to bring equity to our public school system. We fight to make sure that the schools first have the resources they need to bring about the changes that are needed to make sure the students are getting what they deserve, but also we go a little in depth to make sure who are teaching our students look and reflect our students, that there's resources for students with disabilities, students with IEPs, students who are English language learners. We want to make sure that we're not just like bringing funding to schools, but we're actually creating a school climate that meets all of the needs of students, of educators, and of parents. Yeah. And so that's the nitty gritty of HUE.
Well, I want to tackle this because as we're navigating through this COVID-19 pandemic, we're getting back out. We know that school is looking to be in person next fall, but a lot of students had some challenges with this virtual environment. Can you share with us a little bit about that? Because I was hearing from parents, I was hearing from teachers, I was hearing from students themselves that, listen, when it came to having the proper equipment, internet connection, it was really a rough time trying to navigate.
Yeah. I think for many of us who have been doing community organizing, community building work, we understood that COVID-19 was just a symptom. The way that the pandemic was handled just brought to light all of the issues that our communities have been facing for years. And so when the city decided to go fully remote last year, around March, April, we were hearing, like you said, from folks who were impacted by just like a rush process. There was very little understanding, very little clarity. Students and parents did not get the support they needed. Educators didn't get the support they needed. And so there was a lot of students who fell through the cracks. People who couldn't get, who didn't have the resources needed to do remote learning, or students who are just not able to learn in a remote learning environment. And so we were hearing stories about students getting locked out of Zoom Classroom or Google Classroom, educators having to deal with like rush processes where 1 week school is open, the next week school is closed, and having to constantly adapt their teaching models for like a really shaky moment. And so now the schools are reopening in in the fall, that really is concerning. One, because the COVID-19 pandemic is still going on and is still moving at full force. And because last year our schools had to navigate the pandemic with zero additional funding from the state government. And so even though the federal government sent down a relief aid, Governor Cuomo cut the budget. And so we're concerned that this year our schools are not prepared again to reopen fully, and students are going to fall through the cracks. Lives are going to be put in danger because again our schools um, are navigating a pandemic. And so we've just been hearing, especially students who've always been marginalized, students again with IEPs for English language learners, Black and Brown students and Latinx students, students from low income communities. Those are the students who suffer the most, and they're going to continue to suffer unless um, within New York City and across the state, our elected officials actually take into consideration the challenges that students and educators and parents and the whole nine experience, and actually put in some changes to make it a better experience.
Yeah. I know one of the conversations that's being had nationally on a larger scale is about critical race theory, right? And this is a conversation that people are having, talking about race in schools, race in the education system. And I know that there's conversations on a more local level about having more culturally responsive education, education that actually talks about, deals with the culture and the communities to which people attend, people live, and looking for a more holistic approach to how we deal with this issue of culture and education. What would you like to see?
Yeah, so I think one, it's really interesting this backlash around culture, critical race theory, because for one, critical race theory was not like implemented widespread across the board. Like we can be honest that like the attacks on critical race theory are the backlash from a summer of like uprisings, from a summer of folks yelling Black Lives Matter. It's the backlash to folks voting Trump out of office. It's just backlash. It's white supremacy showing itself time and time again. Because if we're honest, our students have not been getting critical race theory. They haven't been getting culturally responsive education, right? And so the fact that folks are so adamantly protesting this just shows that we have some deep, deep societal flaws that we have yet to grapple with. And I think it's important for us to understand that in order for our schools and our communities to actually be affirming and to actually meet the needs of all people, we have to grapple with the issue of race. We have to grapple with the issue of white supremacy and racism in all of our communities. And so I think like we are just not the attacks on curriculum and pedagogy, it's the attacks on our communities. Folks are coming out to say that they don't want to learn about people from different ethnic groups, people from different countries, people of different backgrounds. And we can't let that happen because at the end of the day, the people who are going to be most negatively impacted are Black and Brown Latinx students. It's going to be students who are of different genders and different sexualities. It's going to be students who are often left out of the picture. And so again, we have to be honest and we can't let people paint a picture that isn't true. Critical race theory was not a widely implemented policy. Like our students and our schools have been fighting for culturally responsive education for generations. It has yet to be fully funded, and fully implemented. And so these attacks on CRT are white supremacy showing itself. And we all have to pay attention because this effort is actually really, really dangerous and it's stealing lives and it's negatively impacting our communities. And so again, I think those of us who care about making sure that our society is reflective of all people, we have to be aware of this fight and we have to counter it.
Yeah, it's a big conversation. I really have a hard time with people who want to just kind of whitewash history and just make it seem as though history is the way that people want to present it without challenge or without really knowing the full story. When you know the full story of contributions of people, particularly
Mhm.
African Americans, communities of culture, I mean, communities of color, a huge impact in American society, the backbone of America. And sometimes that stuff will never be read about or even taught until we get ourselves in our own educational environment. So it requires staying on the battlefield. It requires raising your voice, which leads me into talking about this, because I know that you guys really have not just raised your voice uh, publicly, but you've raised your voice amongst electeds. And I want to get your talk about the grappling with the elected officials with regards to legislative advocacy. There's some I believe get it. There's some who I believe still need some education.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think it's understandable. A lot of the communities have struggled, like you mentioned, they have struggled for generations from not having their stories told correctly or not having their voices heard. And a lot of people are just kind of disillusioned, or they completely disengaged from like legislative and electoral processes. And as an organization, we understand that grassroots organizing and legislative advocacy can go hand in hand. That we have to have our boots on the ground. We have to be doing the work within community, but we also have to go up to Albany, to the state capitol. We have to go to locally to city council. We have to speak to like our borough reps to make sure that the things we're fighting for are actually coming to play. And so, for example, this year we're getting like monumental funding from the federal government, sending down relief, another round of relief aid, to us finally getting full funding for the campaign for fiscal equity, which I talked about. Our schools are getting billions of dollars. And so one way that people can engage in this process is to meet with their city council representatives to ensure that when this money comes down to New York City, our city government is actually allocating it in the way that it needs to go. If folks are completely disengaged from this process, or people like us, from like Black and Brown communities, if we're just like, you know what, they're never going to listen to us, there's no use in talking to them. The people who have alternative motives, well, they're going to be scheduling meetings. They're going to be making phone calls. The people who don't want to see CRT, the people who don't want to see our schools safer, the people who don't care about us, they're meeting with their reps to get their voices heard. And so the only way to counter that is to make sure that our representatives see that we also have priorities, and we demand that the people who represent us are also working to actualize those demands. And so it's difficult. Sometimes the process could be really confusing, and that's why as an organization we work with people from start to finish. If you want to talk to your representative, we will support you all the way, because they need to hear your voice. And it can't just be like, we can't just focus macroly on like the presidential races and things like that. We have to be concerned about city council, borough president, district attorneys, comptrollers, state senators, state assembly folks. Like all of these folks play a role in how our communities exist. And so that's, again, we understand that in order for us to actually get what we need to have a two-pronged approach, and it can't just be talking to the same people. We have to like meet with our reps as well.
Well, I want to ask the question as we talk about legislative advocacy. Listen, what are you thinking about mayoral candidates who are out there right now when it comes to the issue of public education? We know that schools are under mayoral control. The mayor will have a major say. Are you satisfied with what you're hearing from mayoral candidates? And you don't have to give any names.
You know, this is a tough one. I think there are
I didn't
some
require you to give
people.
any names, so I took you off the hook.
Cool, I appreciate it. I will say there are some folks who have platforms that are somewhat promising, right? And there are some people who may be leading in the polls who will be absolutely disastrous for public education. Folks who want to see our schools privatized, folks who don't value public education, folks who are thinking about how to make education a profitable enterprise instead of actually something that will work for the benefit of students and school communities. And so I think regardless of who wins the mayoral race, our work is cut out for us. We have no savior. There is no perfect candidate. Regardless, our communities are going to have to fight. And so I think that's my message, that regardless of who is in the mayoral office, that we're still going to have to fight. But there are some people who will make the fight just a little bit easier. And that's all I'm going to say. Y'all can check out our social media to see who we're endorsing. Yeah, I think it has been really scary to see what some of the leading candidates have been saying. I'm not going to lie. And honestly, if we are not all in on hands on deck. We may have a mayor who's going to set our schools back by generations because our schools are under mayoral control, and mayors have so much power. And so yeah, we have a lot of work.
I appreciate the answer. Asamia Diaby, thank you so much for being with us and sharing a little bit about the work that you do. As of course, as we get closer to fall, we'll see how things progress in the school system and then also how things progress mayorally. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All righty, want you to stay with us because we continue with our show. Social Justice Forums will return in just a few seconds.